Hello, it's Randi Rhodes. Here's a clip from our show, and go to randyrhodes.com for the whole thing and a podcast. Buy a stinking podcast.
Mary had a little man.
The fault. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream today. Change has come to America.
Believe me.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show.
Turn up your mind.
Oh. Happy Monday.
But if they simply say no, we're not going to release the underlying evidence, what options do you have?
Well, we will obviously subpoena the report. We will bring Bob Muller in to testify before Congress. We will take it to court if necessary. And in the end, I think the department understands they're going to have to make this public. I think Barr will ultimately understand that as well.
Are you prepared to take the administration to court?
Absolutely. We are going to get to the bottom of this. We are going to share this information with the public. And if the president is serious about all of his claims of exoneration, then he should welcome the publication of this report.
Everything about this has become political. The way to end that, of course, is for the truth to be out there. And if that truth indicates that President Trump committed no crime, impeachable or otherwise, so be it. If it indicates that he did, that's a much more complicated world. But first and foremost, given that we've been on the edge of our seats for the last 2 years on this issue, everyone in this country needs to know what happened, and then we decide where to take it from there.
The Democrats have a responsibility to make sure that there was not a compromise of the presidential election of 2016. If the Attorney General takes the Mueller report and then sanitizes it and releases that as the answer to a comprehensive investigation, then I think the Democrats in the House and Senate, along with Republicans, have a responsibility to ensure that the American people know what happened in 2016.
Yeah, it would be nice to know. I mean, some things need to be made public and other things should not be ever, never made public. For instance, oh my God, just now, I got the report on what is on the videotape with regard to Robert Kraft and the Asian Orchid Day Spa. It is vile. It is gross. It is now in my permanent Rolodex, and I want hazard pay for doing this job. So please do go to randyrhodes.com/support and make a contribution, because I'm going to need massive amounts of therapy. This is vile. It's disgusting. Remember, Robert Kraft, for those of you who aren't into the football, he's 77 years old, for the love of Pete. 77 years. You know, I swear to God, that blue pill has changed everything. 77-year-old men with their little wrinkled, things there. Just go away. Just stop already. They're supposed to be out of the game. We're not even supposed to talk about it. It's not even something that could possibly happen, except with the health of Big Pharma. Oh, my God. And so I just read this, and I have to get it off of my conscience. It's got to come out of my just now, like 5 seconds before that's he's 77 years old. He's one of 200 people that have now been these men in these day spas. Who the hell in a strip mall near you? There's white slavery. Well, there's freaking human trafficking in your strip mall. These women, I swear to God, they have nowhere to go and no one to talk to. Half of them don't even speak English. And Donald Trump denies that there's the human trafficking problem that happens by airplane, because there's apparently a land bridge between us and China that we don't know about. But Kraft, oh, this is so vile. He visited the Orchids of Asia Day Spa in Jupiter, Florida, 2 times in 2 days. 2 times in 2 days, and one of the days was the day of the AFC playoffs. Oh, my God. He went there right before the AFC playoffs, And he hired himself, one of these girls. His lawyers are saying that they categorically denied that Mr. Kraft engaged in any illegal activity. And because it is a judicial matter, we will not be commenting further. But they have him on videotape. You know why there was videotape in there? Because the police in Jupiter, the police, in Hope Sound, the police in Palm Beach County, Martin County, all this East Coast, strip mall thing that I live amongst, they had asked to please put cameras in those day spas to catch these dirty old men. And so all we knew before this was that the video footage of Bob Kraft showed him receiving paid acts in a room at the spa. But now we have a description of actually what he did, and it's just, I can't. Let's put it this way, okay? At first it was hands that were involved and toweling off. Mr. Kraft laying nude on a table. And that poor woman who had to do that, she had to sleep on the table that Bob Kraft, was serviced upon, and cook her meals in the back of this strip mall on a little hibachi grill, and live in that same day spot and sleep in those beds. And then the second morning, he went back again at 10:59 in the morning in a white Bentley. And this time it involved, oh my God, a Lewinsky? How else can I say? A Lewinsky, and then she had to towel him off as well. And his lawyer still says there's no there. And it's on the video. And I just feel like so disgusting. And this is like the slavery that's going on. And the president, this president of ours. It's so weird, but, the story about Jeffrey Epstein is haunting me because I know it isn't over. And when this presidency is concluded, either because of the Muller report, either because, Michael Cohen is going to testify on Wednesday in public, and we're going to find out that this man is a cheat and a fraud in a provable way, in a demonstrably provable way, in a court of law beyond a reasonable doubt way. After he testifies on Wednesday, we're going to find out that he's also some sort of a disgusting pedophile, and that he's also some guy who imported women from various Eastern Bloc countries to work for the Trump modeling agency at the tender age of 14 and 15. I mean, all this is connected. There is no way it isn't. And it's just it's so unbelievable that in this country, because of television, because of reality TV, which started on MTV with Big Freaking Brother and then progressed to, it's cheaper than scripted shows, so this is what we're going to serve up to you every day, and you're going to grow to love Honey Boo Boo. She's just, precocious. And now we have The Apprentice, and that man was able to use his fake celebrity as a fake reality TV star in a fake reality TV show to be our fake reality TV president, and really managed to, stifle any woman who would come. Now there's another lawsuit today. There's a staffer that worked on the campaign who's now suing Donald Trump, saying that he kissed her without her consent when she was, working for him, and that, she wasn't paid the same as the boys. It's really an equal pay claim, but she said that in her lawsuit, she filed it today, that Trump grabbed her and forcibly kissed her without her consent inside an RV in Florida. Honestly, I can't. And when they asked Trump about Bob Kraft over the weekend, it's like I don't know anything about it, but I did hear, and it's very sad, and I don't know what to say, and it's just like he denied he denied it strongly. He denied it. Which one is that? I don't. Oh, there it is, 20.
I really don't know too much about it. I know he's done a great job as labor secretary, and that seems like a long time ago, but I know he's been a fantastic labor secretary. That's all I can really tell you about it. That's all I know about it.
What about the charges against Bob Kraft? He's a friend of yours.
Well, it's very very sad. I was very surprised to see it. He's proclaimed his innocence totally, but I'm very surprised to see it.
He's proclaimed his innocence totally. He's on freaking videotape getting whacked off, okay? The first one was a happy ending, and the second one was a Lewinsky, and then the poor girl has to wipe him dry, and then he goes back into his Bentley after he pays her. And this girl, these people, this sting operation was vast. It's been going on since July here in Florida, and there's like 10 different spas, and these girls, like before they could, actually do anything to help them, they would be moved from one spa to the other, and the police couldn't even help them. And at first, they were going to arrest these women. The women were the ones that were going to get arrested as prostitutes, and not the men who procured them, or the women in the day spas that made them stay there at night and that would go wrangle them and bring them and move them around from spa to spa. It's so sickening what's going on. I can't even stand it. And the crazy thing is, the labor secretary is a very important position if you have a beef with human slavery, if you have a beef with human trafficking, or if you have a beef with young underage Eastern Bloc models being brought into the United States on tourist visas and forced into a life of living in a basement, in a bunk bed, in a dirty, filthy apartment in New York City, and having to pay Donald Trump $1,600 for the privilege. And that is what his modeling agency was. His modeling agency was bringing in these Eastern Bloc country models. One of the models who actually complained was a girl from Canada who came in on a tourist visa. And, obviously she understood she couldn't work with a tourist visa, but she was actually getting jobs. And then realized that after 3 years of working for Donald Trump, she had only managed to take for herself $8,000 after 3 years of modeling jobs, because Donald Trump was charging her $1,600 a month to live in this filthy, filthy basement in a bunk bed situation where, there were 11 girls crammed into this basement, and each girl was being charged, and they had nobody to complain to because their visas weren't allowing them to work, and yet they were working. Okay? And so they really couldn't complain because they knew if they did, they would be deported, or if they knew that if they asked too many questions, they wouldn't get bookings, they wouldn't get jobs. And one of these this girl from Canada actually told Mother Jones magazine that she tried to get the bunk bed nearest the window because it was blazing hot in there. It was a sweltering New York summer when she arrived. And then one morning, all of a sudden, she felt like she was getting wet. And she realized that some person on the street, some homeless guy, was peeing into the grate. And it was that window. And she got peed on. And when she complained about it, they said, you owe $1,600, you better pay. Donald Trump literally had all these charges, monetary fees for these women. He would charge them for their headshots and their portfolios, and he would charge them rent to live in a basement. And so this girl from Canada said that she had to learn to write in Russian, "Please clean up after yourself," in the bathroom, because the girls were so young that they didn't even know how to pick up after themselves. And this Acosta guy is our labor secretary. He's the one that gave Jeffrey Epstein the sweetheart deal, where Jeffrey Epstein, obviously, you're talking 80 identified 14, 13-year-old girls were raped by him. Donald Trump, lives literally a mile away from that. Now, I don't know Jeffrey Epstein. I don't know Jeffrey. But in New York Magazine in 2002, he said he knows Jeffrey Epstein. He's a great guy. He vouched for Jeffrey Epstein, saying he loves beautiful women as much as I do. He likes them younger than I do. And then we find out that Donald Trump's modeling agency was importing 14-year-old girls, 15-year-old girls, illegally on tourist visas, telling them how to lie when they were coming through border and customs, to say that they were only here looking for agents, they weren't here working. What is it that's going to bring this man down? If it's not this, if it's not Muller, if it's not Russians, and if it's not rigging an election and his son hunting for dirt on Hillary Clinton, and Seychelles backroom meetings, and Arabs and Saudi Arabians and the Saudis killing journalists, and Trump and Jared vouching for them. Couldn't it possibly be this molestation? Couldn't it be?
Thanks, Randi at RandiRhodes.com.
Go for launch.
Speaking truth to power, the Randi Rhodes Show.
Well, he was very politically connected. Some of his closest friends were world leaders, ex-presidents, royalty, actors, actresses, people in philanthropy and business. He used those connections as well as his financial means to hire some of the best attorneys in the country. Alan Dershowitz, Kenneth Starr, Roy Black among them, and they put all the pressure to bear on prosecutors, first the state prosecutor and then the federal prosecutor, Alex Acosta, who is now the Secretary of Labor, to make to just make this case really go away. They felt that this was something they needed to keep out of the media. They wanted to keep it away from his victims, exactly what they were doing, because they feared that had the victims found out, then they would have objected publicly, and then the whole deal could have fallen through.
It is so vile. It is so disgusting what's going on. And, these are some of the most vulnerable girls that we had in our community. These were kids from foster care. These were kids from, one of them was the towel girl at Mar-a-Lago. I'm shocked. I tell you, I'm shocked. And now you have the sex trafficking with foreign girls coming here from being brought into this country from China with their passports being taken from them, which is really the typical MO of human sex traffickers. They take these girls from some of the poorest places on the planet. They bring them into our country. They take their passports as soon as they land, and they tell them that they have to work. They have to work and pay back the pimps, the traffickers, for bringing them here, and that they can't leave until they work off their debt. And their debt has to be worked off on the penis of a 77-year-old, disgusting, wrinkly, creepy old guy who comes there, every morning that he's here in Florida in his freaking Bentley. And meanwhile, you're outside, you're out back cooking your food on the back steps of a strip mall and sleeping on the same bed that you just serviced this wrinkly, pruny, disgusting old, dirty old man. I mean, it's just so disgusting. What in the world is going to actually make people say, I can't support this anymore? I can't support this man. I can't support this administration. I can't support any of the things that he's been involved in. Why are all his friends pedophiles? And meanwhile, we're sitting here listening to these crazy mofos on these crazy talk shows talk about Pizzagate. Made up stuff that isn't real, to the point where a North Carolina man is so moved to do something for the poor little girls that he drives himself to North Carolina to shoot up a pizza parlor and a ping pong palace because he thinks Hillary Clinton is the one that's doing these things. And the truth is that this stuff is happening in strip malls near you, obviously near me, at Mar-a-Lago. It's happening with his modeling agency. It's happening in apartments in New York City. You got girls living in the basement. I mean, it is just so unbelievable. And in the meantime, everybody's shocked, I tell you, that he's a liar, that he's trying to do business with Russia, and that he didn't think he would win the presidency, but he did think that if he flattered Vladimir Putin, he'd get his Trump Tower Moscow. Or that maybe there's a tape of him doing something like, R. Kelly-ish. He believed he could fly. He was wrong. 52 years old, and he's just now, R. Kelly, $1 million bond, and he can't make bail, which is what, 10% of that's $100,000. He doesn't have $100,000. After all these years, how sad is this? But, this week, let me tell you, is going to be wild. This is going to be the weirdest, wildest, craziest week. And all of this about human trafficking and vulnerable women and young girls and all of this about Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump and maybe, I know Bill Clinton has been on Jeffrey Epstein's plane. I don't know, all this about, why people are willing to defend predators like Jeffrey Epstein for a buck. And that would, that's the best, sunniest, view you could take of this. And why all those lawyers came from Kirkland and Ellis. And why Acosta came from Kirkland and Ellis. And he's our labor secretary, who, by the way, is in charge of things like girls coming here on tourist visas but working. Okay? The Labor Department is in charge of enforcing those rules having to do with work visas versus tourist visas. And the man, Acosta, who gave a sweetheart deal to Jeffrey Epstein, lied to the girls and tried to hide the fact that a plea deal was being entered into and not notifying them, violating their rights under the Victims' Rights Act, and just throwing this sweeping this under the rug. And now he's the labor secretary in charge of policing this area of law where people are coming here on tourist visas, but they're being put to work and charged for their bunk bed in a dirty basement in the East Village by Donald Trump. How is anybody going to ever hold this man accountable? So Acosta came from Kirkland and Ellis. The prosecutor came from Kirkland and Ellis. The defense attorney, Jay Lefkowitz, came from Kirkland and Ellis. Everybody comes from Kirkland and Ellis. And nobody sees maybe there's something going on that they should have recused themselves. There's a conflict of interest. How could you be on both sides of a case and you all know each other? I mean, it's frustrating. But then we're all going to forget about it very, very quickly. Tomorrow, the week will really start, right? Because tomorrow Congress is back in session. And so tomorrow, Nancy Pelosi is going to put on the floor this joint resolution to end the national emergency that Donald Trump started. I mean, everybody forgets we're living in a national emergency, okay? Living in that. And so tomorrow is the day that Nancy Pelosi is going to put a joint resolution, a privilege resolution, on the floor of the House. There are 222 co-sponsors of this piece of legislation, which means it's going to pass. And then it'll go over to the Senate, and it's like throwing a grenade into the Senate, because the Senate is going to have to choose between upholding the Constitution or siding with this pervert. This man who constantly is getting away with the sleaziest behavior in the history of presidents. And the Senate is, I don't know what they're going to do. I really don't know. But this is their come to Jesus moment. This is the moment they have to say, are they for America, or are they so tainted, or are they so enamored, in love with President Perv? And and they asked Trump already, even if because it only needs a simple majority. I believe there are, all we need is 4 Republican votes. And I know that there are at least four Republicans who said this is not a good way to govern, declaring a national emergency and usurping the power of Congress, taking away their power of the purse, their power to appropriate money, and taking it unto himself, rendering Congress pretty much useless. If you don't need to go to Congress to get money, I've always said to you, the president can't spend a dime. People always say, oh, well, Obama, he increased the deficit when he was increasing the deficit because he was asking for a stimulus package, which, by the way, saved our economy. Everybody was calling me up. He's going to raise the deficit. And the Tea Party started, right? Because, the deficit. Now nobody gives a rat's ass about anything like that's called a deficit or a debt. They just don't care. But I kept saying to you that the president can't spend any money. If your beef is with anybody, it's with the Republican Congress, okay? It's not with the president. The president can only put policy forward. He can't spend. Well, if Donald Trump takes that power for himself, you don't even need a Congress. And this is what autocrats do. They make the Congress, the parliament, the check on their power useless. They actually render them completely impotent, which is what Bob Kraft ought to be at this stage in his life. It's that little blue pill, man. It's changed everything about dirty old men. They used to be, laughable, and now they're freaking dangerous and gross. But, so tomorrow she's going to put on the floor the joint resolution. It's going to pass. It will go to the Senate. The Senate, I don't know if these guys will vote. I know Susan Collins is the only Republican who said she will vote with the Democrats. Other people have said this is not the way to govern, like Rand Paul has said this is not good, and, it could happen the other way around. Chuck Grassley has said this is not good, and it could happen with the Democratic Party. They could declare, the opioid epidemic a national emergency, and then the president can spend money on treatment. Oh, that would be heinous. But you see where I'm where I'm going, right? So Grassley said it, and Rand Paul has said it, and Murkowski has said it, and Collins, but none of them have committed to voting with the Democrats to stop this president. Nobody except for Collins has said that she will. But I suspect a simple majority, could happen. But then he says he'll veto it. And then we're looking at 67 votes needed in the Senate, and that will never happen.
Will you definitively veto that resolution that was introduced today that would block your national emergency if it passes?
On the wall?
Yes.
Will I veto it? 100%. 100%. And I don't think it survives a veto. We have too many smart people that want border security, so I can't imagine it could survive a veto, but I will veto it, yes.
I will veto it, yes. For a stupid, stupid wall to stop human trafficking, which is going on in his backyard with his friends being the people who pay the trafficked women, who are not coming here through the southern border unless there's a land bridge from Russia, from China, that somehow, the satellites have missed. I looked on Google Earth. I didn't see any stinking land bridge from Florida to Beijing. It's a tunnel beneath the ocean. Yeah, where Ariel lives. I mean, honest to God, this is so strange and sick and so twisted and so ugly. And this is because he's moved the conversation from, Honduran housewives who are scared for their lives because of the United States foreign policy intervention in Latin America in the 80s that we're paying for to this minute. And now he's contemplating something along the same lines in Venezuela with the same guy, Elliot Abrams, that created this human catastrophe in Central America, is now the special envoy to Venezuela. I mean, it's just so sick. And everybody is just sickened by the prospect that, they're going to recreate because they have. And then so he decides that he's going to move the conversation from Honduran housewives to human trafficking. And it's so weird that he has this rape fantasy that he keeps on telling you over and over again about women being smuggled in backseats of cars and the duct tape. And meanwhile, they're driving down, like Clematis Street. They're driving down West Palm Beach. These same trafficked girls from one day spot to another. And his buddy, a lot of his buddies, there were 171 men that had been videotaped that, all from Palm Beach. It takes my breath away. It truly does, because if he gave a rat's ass about human trafficking, if he cared enough about it, he would know it. He was part of it. He would know that he knew Jeffrey Epstein. He would know that it's going on in his own 5 minutes from his house. He would understand. He wouldn't defend Bob Kraft. He denies it totally. Denies it. I was sorry to see it. Sorry to see it.
This sordid saga of sexual abuse in South Florida is one that really has taken on national significance because of the high profile, the celebrity of the people who came to Jeffrey Epstein's mansions in Palm Beach, in the Caribbean, where there were parties at which many underage women were around and allegedly available to the men at the parties. And the men who are at those parties are really kind of a who's who of American politics, ranging from President Trump, President Clinton, a number of prominent people such as criminal defense attorney Alan Dershowitz.
Epstein sued Bradley Edwards, the Florida lawyer who represented several of the alleged victims.
He sued them.
He accused Edwards of conducting a scheme to lure investors by flaunting his success at winning big settlements in prior cases. Edwards denied the claim, and Epstein settled the case moments before the trial began on December 4th, narrowly avoiding the accuser's testimonies.
He has spent the last 10 years fighting a legal battle against the women who accuse him of sexually abusing them. And each of these cases had dragged on for years, this sort of Byzantine bickering among lawyers that has continued for year after year as Epstein delays and tries to push off any day of reckoning.
In 2008, Epstein pleaded guilty to a Florida state charge of felony solicitation of underage girls, for which he served a 13th-month jail sentence. The U.S. Attorney in Miami at the time, Alexander Acosta, now the U.S. Labor Secretary, halted federal action against Epstein in exchange for a guilty plea. Edwards is now trying to persuade a federal judge to reopen the decade-old investigation into Epstein.
Why did Alex Acosta do that? People on the side of the women who were assaulted by Jeffrey Epstein say that Acosta did this because he came to some sort of a deal with Epstein. And in fact, Acosta has said that he indeed felt that his prosecutors were under tremendous pressure, were literally, as he put it, under assault from Jeffrey Epstein and his many lawyers, including Alan Dershowitz, Ken Starr from the Clinton impeachment saga, and other very prominent defense attorneys who he said were going after his prosecutors, looking into their own personal proclivities, their pasts, looking for dirt to use against these federal prosecutors.
Dershowitz said no such pressure occurred. Many of Epstein's accusers and critics argue his sentencing was lighter compared with what he would have faced if Acosta had not shut down federal prosecution.
So in this case, you have the prosecutor comes from Kirkland and Ellis. You have the defense attorney coming from Kirkland and Ellis. We have our attorney general now, Bill Barr, who came from Kirkland and Ellis. And we have a deputy attorney general who's been nominated by Donald Trump, Mr. Rosen, who also comes from Kirkland and Ellis. Something tells me that Kirkland and Ellis, their conflict, when they run their conflict thing, it's broken. Because nothing dings, nothing shows up on their conflict checks. This is so sick. And now, there's a BBC documentary about this, it's called Trump Is the President a Sex Pest? That's what they call it in Britain, a sex pest. This is a year-old documentary that's still out there, and the question that's posed in this documentary accuses Donald Trump of inappropriate sexual behavior by 16 women.
I wound up touting the Trump narrative for over a decade. That was my job. Always stay on message. Always defend.
He went on to explain that you live by the gun and by the knife, and you die by the gun and by the knife.
How many times did Mr. Trump ask you to threaten an individual or entity on his behalf?
Quite a few times.
50 times?
More.
100 times?
More.
200 times?
More.
500 times?
Probably.
When you were chosen for this job, did you have any choice? Is this something you had to do when you were asked to do it?
Everybody's job at the Trump Organization is to protect Mr. Trump. Every day, most of us knew we were coming in and we were going to lie for him on something. And that became the norm.
Oh, we're all tied up.
We're all together.
All together.
All together.
Right.
We think together, hang together, live together.
I did things and I acted improperly, at times at Mr. Trump's behest. I blindly followed his demands.
But did you know what they meant?
Well, I never asked what it meant, but it meant like sort of in the style of an organization, or in that style. But you don't bother. I didn't bother. I never did bother.
You never did what?
I never bothered to find out what it meant, but I have an idea what it meant.
That's how he speaks. He doesn't give you questions. He doesn't give you orders. He speaks in a code.
As the senator put it before, what did I get out of it?
What'd you get out of it?
Nothing but misery.
My loyalty to Mr. Trump has cost me everything. My family's happiness, friendships, my law license, my company, my livelihood, my honor, my reputation, and soon my freedom.
It's not personal, Sonny.
It's strictly business.
Oh, my God. That's Joe Valachi over there, everybody. Joe Valachi. Those Valachi hearings were led back in the day, okay? I think it was, like in the 60s. And that is where The Godfather, the scene with Frankie Pantangeli and all that is exactly the set. I mean, they used the Valachi hearings in Congress to create the Godfather hearings where Michael Corleone, except of course Michael Corleone doesn't testify the way Joe Valachi did because, Frankie Pantangeli, sorry, who is Michael Cohen in this? Didn't testify because Michael Corleone brought in Frankie Pantangeli's brother to sit there and to send a message in code to Frankie that if he testified, his brother would get it, right? And so what Trump did in the modern day was tweet out that Michael Cohen's father-in-law would get it if Michael Cohen testified, right? You see? So I got to say, anybody who is looking at what is going on here with Michael Cohen and what's going on here with the Trump organization would be making a very big mistake by comparing this to Nixon. And this is what I'm hearing a lot of on the TV, that this is all about what Nixon did, only because the similarities are, the similarities are simple ones. The similarities are that Nixon broke into the Democratic National Committee headquarters or hired thugs to break into the National Committee headquarters, right? And that in this case, Russia, a foreign adversary, a mafia state, seriously, a mafia state with a mafia-run oligarch in charge of it, with all of his capos giving vig back to him in order to do business anywhere on his turf, which is Russia. Okay, that is not the same as Richard Nixon hiring, a couple of thugs to break into Daniel Ellsberg's psychiatrist office or the Democratic National Committee. So I think that the analogy there is very flawed when they say this is just like Nixon. No, this is not just like Nixon. This is like Valachi. This is like a mafia case. This is like The Godfather. This is like Frankie Pantangeli. This is like a RICO investigation. That is what this is. That's what the Valachi hearings were all about. It was about RICO, okay? It was about Cosa Nostra. It was about organized crime and how it was organized. And if you want to think of Donald Trump as something, think of him as the American Don for the Russian mafia. Okay? Because that's what Donald Trump really is. He's no more, he's no less. He is the godfather of the American mafia with regard to, the territory. And Russia is letting Donald Trump control this territory of theirs. And it's so unbelievable. I mean, the Valachi hearings were about explaining to the American people that there was a mafia. Back then, people didn't believe there was a mafia. They used to say things like Senator Geary says in The Godfather, this is just an attempt to besmirch the fine Italian Americans who I consider to be the salt of the earth, right? This is all to besmirch. And in fact, we had this conversation when The Sopranos first started. Remember? Poor James Gandolfini, we miss you. But when The Sopranos first started, we still have our Edie Falco, though, gotta say. When The Sopranos first started, the same conversation. Is this an attempt to besmirch the fine name of Italian Americans who are the salt of the earth? No, it isn't. It's an attempt to show what organized crime organizations look like. That's it. And Donald Trump is, he's the American Don of the Russian mafia. You got this family of his involved in all kinds of schemes and frauds and lying and cover-ups and crimes for years-long periods of time. And Donald Trump is the person who has the clear benefit of leadership in this organized criminal organization. Now, that's what RICO is all about. RICO is about charging an organization with one charge, a RICO Act violation, which takes into account everything, the speaking in code, okay, the day-to-day crime, the rarely directing of ordering a lieutenant to do something illegal, but instead offering oblique instructions or expressing general wishes. And, you know, that their lieutenants would simply know how to translate into action. And that is what Jerry Connolly, that is what Justin Amash, a Republican from Michigan, actually questioned Michael Cohen about.
You've suggested that the president sometimes communicates his wishes indirectly. For example, you said, quote, Mr. Trump did not directly tell me to lie to Congress. That's not how he operates, end quote. Can you explain how he does this?
Sure. It would be no different if I said, that's the nicest looking tie I've ever seen, isn't it? What are you going to do? You're going to fight with him? The answer is no. So you say, yeah, it's the nicest looking tie I've ever seen. That's how he speaks. He doesn't give you questions. He doesn't give you orders. He speaks in a code. And I understand the code because I've been around him for a decade.
And it's your impression that others who work for him understand the code as well?
Most people, yes.
That's what he's talking about. He's talking about RICO. He's talking about organized crime. He's talking about a corrupt organization that's covered under the Racketeering Influenced Corrupt Organizations Act. That's RICO. That's what RICO stands for. Okay? And it's a law designed to allow prosecutors to go after enterprises, organizations that engage in extended, repeated, organized fraud or criminality. Okay? There are predicate crimes that need to come under, you know, like the prosecutors have to consider, are these predicates met? If the predicates are met, you can charge RICO, right? And they stitch together evidence of a corrupt organization, and then they go after everybody who's involved in that organization as part of an organized conspiracy to benefit its leadership. That's what the Trump organization is. That's what the Trump Foundation is. That's what the Trump charities are about. That's what, you know, everything is about benefiting Donald Trump, no matter how they file it, no matter how they present themselves, okay? Now, the predicates include things like violent crimes, which we don't have evidence of here, like murder and kidnapping and arson and robbery. But it also includes things like fraud and obstruction of justice and money laundering and even aiding or abetting illegal immigration, like Trump does at the various golf courses. Like he actually will have his HR people drive somebody who is undocumented that he likes to a place to get fraudulent documents that are more convincing than the ones they currently have. All these stories that are out there seemed like disparate little items until you realize they're all being brought together by the Oversight Committee, by the Judiciary Committee, by the Ways and Means Committee, by the Foreign Affairs Committee. All of these things are being brought together in one big, giant package of RICO. That is why there were 81 requests from 81 separate people and entities put out there by Gerald Nadler at Judiciary. That is why. And I hope everyone understands that the reason why these specific organizations and entities were selected is because there can be no claim of executive privilege with them because they've either cooperated with Robert Mueller, a la Don McGahn. You know, Don McGahn is a senior White House official. But the only person that can, claim executive privilege is the executive, is the president himself. And when Mueller wanted to talk to Don McGahn, the president didn't exert executive privilege. He didn't assert, that's the right word. He didn't assert executive privilege. So Don McGahn was able to talk to Mueller. And so there can now be no claim of executive privilege that Donald Trump can assert because he previously allowed Don McGahn to talk to Mueller. See, these 81 were picked for very specific reasons. And one of those major, major reasons is that the documents that are being asked for are all documents that have previously been produced. They'd been previously produced by the people on the list, either to congressional committees, to Robert Mueller, to SDNY, to a Virginia court, to a Manhattan court. See what I mean? And that is why this 81 is so, it's moving so fast. They're getting compliance, and they're getting compliance pretty quickly because these are documents that are already packaged together for discovery purposes, for turning over to various entities.
So this is a big list. 81 people is a lot. Have you had any response already? I realize this is the first day.
Yes, we have. We've been having some very positive responses from a number of the 81 people today.
In what sense?
Well, they've been saying they will give us documents, and some have already started giving us documents.
Do you anticipate that these letters and these requests that you sent out today will be the first step towards subpoenas to some of these people and entities if they don't cooperate?
Well, if they don't cooperate, yes, but we don't know that they won't cooperate. In the initial batch of requests we sent out to these 81 people, we limited the requests to material that they had already submitted to other agencies, to the special prosecutor, the Southern District, so that they could be so that they could respond quickly and there could be no question of privilege. We will follow up with some of them, maybe many of them, with other document requests that for documents they haven't already submitted to others. But to get speedy compliance, to start the work very quickly, the initial document request was for documents that they had already turned over to other people.
You see, there is a method to the Judiciary Committee. There's an actual thought process. This is not Benghazi, okay? This is a serious look at a fraudulent organization headed by the President of the United States. This is a serious RICO enterprise. This is an effort to identify not just the obstruction of justice, not just the abuse of his power in office, but this is about insurance fraud. This is about suborning perjury, asking Michael Cohen to lie. And on the other side, I'll play you a back and forth between Representative Jerry Connolly, where he asks Michael Cohen about the Trump lawyers, the Jay Sekulows, and the group coming to him, and did they ask him to lie for the president? Did they ask him to cover stuff up? Now, that's witness tampering. That's also called suborning perjury. That's also covered under RICO, along with the tax fraud, the bank fraud, the charity fraud, and AOC when she questioned about insurance fraud. This would all fall under the racketeer-influenced corrupt organization law. That's what Congress is doing. And this is what it looks like.
All things Randi at RandiRhodes.com.
Go for launch.
Speaking truth to power, the Randi Rhodes Show.
This meeting occurred just before your testimony before the Select Committee on Intelligence here in the House. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Was that a topic of conversation with the president himself?
If this is the specific instance that I was there with Mr. Sekulow, yes.
So you had a conversation with the President of the United States about your impending testimony before the House Intelligence Committee. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What was the nature of that conversation?
He wanted me to cooperate. He also wanted just to ensure, by making the statement, and I said it in my testimony, there is no Russia, there is no collusion, there is no deal. He goes, it's all a witch hunt, and he goes, this stuff has to end.
Did you take those comments to be suggestive of what might flavor your testimony?
Sir, he's been saying that to me for many, many months. And at the end of the day, I knew exactly what he wanted me to say,
And why was Mr. Sekulow in the meeting?
Yeah.
Because he was going to be representing Mr. Trump going forward as one of his personal attorneys in this matter.
So it was sort of a handoff meeting.
Correct.
In any way, final question, did the president in any way, from your point of view, coach you in terms of how to respond to questions or the content of your testimony before a House committee?
Again, it's a difficult answer because he doesn't tell you what he wants. What he does is, again, Michael, there's no rush. There's no collusion. There's no involvement. There's no interference. I know what he means because I've been around him for so long. So if you're asking me whether or not that's the message, that's staying on point, that's the party line that he created, that so many others are now touting, yes, that's the message.
See, this is what I'm talking about. So what you have here is the president suborning perjury from Michael Cohen with regard to Michael Cohen's testimony to the House Intelligence Committee. And Jerry Connolly understood this, and that is why he asked, did he tell you to lie? And he said, he doesn't ask you. He talks in code, okay? He just keeps saying to you, there is no Russia deal. There is no collusion. It's all a witch hunt. And Michael Cohen knows that that's what he's supposed to say, okay? What he does, there's no Russia, there's no collusion, there's no involvement, there's no interference. And Jerry Connolly says, did the president in any way, from your point of view, coach you in terms of how to respond to the questions or the content of your testimony before a House committee? He says, again, it's difficult to answer because he doesn't tell you what he wants. Michael, there's no Russia, there's no collusion, there's no involvement, there's no interference. I know what he means because I've been around him for so long. So if you're asking me whether or not that's the message, that's staying on point. That's the party line that he created, that so many others are now touting. Yes, that is the message he wanted me to reinforce. And then when Justin Amash from Michigan, a Republican, said he doesn't give you orders, he speaks in code, and he says, yes, and I understand the code.
You've suggested that the president sometimes communicates his wishes indirectly. For example, you said, quote, Mr. Trump did not directly tell me to lie to Congress. That's not how he operates, end quote. Can you explain how he does this?
Sure. It would be no different if I said, that's the nicest looking tie I've ever seen, isn't it? What are you going to do? You're going to fight with him? The answer is no. So you say, yeah, it's the nicest looking tie I've ever seen. That's how he speaks. He doesn't give you questions. He doesn't give you orders. He speaks in a code. And I understand the code because I've been around him for a decade.
And it's your impression that others who work for him understand the code as well?
Most people, yes.
Now, that is exactly what Joe Valachi testified to. And they said, did you ask him what he meant by that? You know, he's talking about the oath of omerta, Joe Valachi was. And he's saying the Godfather pricks your finger and then you put the blood and you go, did you ever ask him what this means? He goes, I didn't bother. He knew, he didn't bother. He knew what it meant. Everybody understood what it meant, okay? And just so we can remember that Cohen pled guilty to making false statements to Congress on the Moscow Tower deal. In the sentencing memo, Muller writes that when he submitted to the federal court, his lies submitted to the federal court, his conduct involving false statements to Congress on the Moscow Tower deal, quote, was intended to benefit client one, that's Trump, in accordance with client one's directives. This goes to the Comey testimony, too, that we played yesterday for you. And, we could pull it up, too. But Comey testified to the same kind of code. Comey testified that when he went to the White House and he was asked, can you see your way clear to let Flynn go? Senator Risch from Idaho tried to say, well, how many people ever get prosecuted because they say they hope for for some result? No. Risch, you missed the entire RICO thing that Mueller is looking at. You missed the entire meaning behind this code. And Comey said it wasn't exactly in those words, but I took it as a directive that that is what he wanted me to do. And that's also an indication that this is a RICO investigation. Now, I will tell you, there's a lot of people out there that are like, oh, you know, this Russia thing, Russia, and now they're changing it all. Now they're changing it all to be obstruction of justice and suborning perjury and tax fraud and insurance fraud and charity fraud and witness tampering. They're not changing anything. Two things can be true at the same time. That Trump was taking help from the government of Vladimir Putin, that Michael Cohen doesn't have direct evidence, and he's an attorney, but he has circumstantial evidence, which is usually more powerful than eyewitness testimony, should tell you that two things could be true at the same time. That Donald Trump was willing to and did get help from the Russian government, did get help from other people around him who would coordinate with the dump, with WikiLeaks, with Guccifer, with the dump. I mean, Roger Stone, you know, just so you know, Roger Stone pled guilty. Roger Stone is charged with, he didn't plead guilty, Roger Stone is charged with lying about his interactions with Russian intelligence operative Guccifer and lying about his contacts with WikiLeaks. That is why Roger Stone had his house raided, because they have evidence that a court accepted to indicate enough that with probable cause that Roger Stone was in touch with WikiLeaks and lied about it, that he was in touch with Guccifer and he lied about it. This is all part of the same exact case. Now, I'll tell you, Congress has a lower burden of proof in some respects than Mueller does, but a higher burden of proof in other respects. What does that mean? It means Congress can find that somebody did that a president, let's be specific, that a president did something that that isn't criminal, because he had a lot of buffers, Senator. He never gave a direct order. He had a lot of buffers. So if he told you to push a button, yeah, I knew what he meant, and did you ever have a direct conversation with him where he said to you to push a button? No, he had a lot of people, in between. Oh, so the president had buffers. What? President had buffers. What's the buff? Oh, yeah, he had a lot of buffers, Senator. Okay? So you could have evidence of all kinds of fraud. You could have evidence of, all kinds of things that might not be criminal, but are impeachable. For instance, violation of the emoluments clause, using the presidency to enrich yourself. That might not be criminal, but it is impeachable. So you have two different, but the burden of proof on Congress is higher in this way. They have to convince us that impeachment is warranted, something they failed to do when it came to Bill Clinton parsing his words about having an affair. Now, that was impeachable. Why? Because they believed that Bill Clinton lied about conversations he had had with Monica Lewinsky, where apparently Monica Lewinsky got the message from the president, Clinton, that they were to keep this affair secret and that she should never admit it. And that was what she was doing until Linda Tripp and Lucianne Goldberg came up with a scheme to get her to tape record her conversations. Well, she didn't do it. They did it. They tape recorded her conversations and then used that as evidence to show that Bill Clinton asked Monica Lewinsky to lie about their affair. That became known as suborning perjury. And while that wasn't going to be a criminal charge against Bill Clinton in a court of law, it was an impeachable offense as far as the Republicans were concerned. However, the American people weren't buying it. We didn't think that that was impeachable. And impeachment is a political effort. And they did not have, the Republicans did not have on their side, clean hands, because Newt Gingrich was on his third wife at the time, and was, he was on his second wife, having an affair with the third wife, the to-be third wife. We had Livingston, who was also, fooling around. You had a lot of different. So we didn't believe they had clean hands. And number two, we didn't believe that an affair was an impeachable offense, whether the two of them, who Monica was in love, decided to cover up, which is normal behavior for an affair. That's why it's called an affair and not an open relationship. And so Bill Clinton's approval ratings went through the roof during the impeachment. Bill Clinton's approval ratings during the impeachment went up to 68%. 68% of the American people supported Bill Clinton and were furious with the Republicans who were trying to ruin his presidency, because Bill Clinton, seriously, was the only person to balance the budget. He was the only one talking about health care at all. That was Hillary, right? He was the only person that understood boom and bust. And he was the only one where wages were growing and people felt, that the economy was working for them. We were seeing a lot of new inventions. We were seeing a lot of innovation. We were seeing the internet come to fruition. Phones were getting smaller. They were things that were taking up entire rooms were now in your pocket. And people liked it. And so to go after Bill Clinton on something so stupid backfired. So what's going on here? And this is why yesterday I told you two things. Donald Trump will die in prison because of this RICO investigation that is now started. And the only reason why it took so long to get started is because Idiot Boy shut down the government for 35 days. And so no one could do anything. Now they're back and they are beginning this investigation, which will be laid out before you and me, which will show you that this president has been destroying records in the White House about conversations he had with Vladimir Putin, about the interpreter telling her never to tell anybody whatever he said to Vladimir Putin. I could tell you the Intelligence Committee, the Oversight Committee, they just wrote a letter to Mick Mulvaney, the acting chief of staff, and they are requesting all kinds of documents that are protected under the Presidential Records Act, meaning the president has a duty to preserve all presidential records, and that would include the president is literally affirmatively prohibited from disposing of records, okay? That's the Presidential Records Act, because the president's conversations with foreign leaders belong to the American people, believe it or not. We live in a democracy, and Trump is required to preserve those records. And it seems like he has told interpreters to throw away their notes. There's a story that Politico broke a while ago that said that there's a guy who tapes Trump's papers back together after he rips them up. That was June 10th, 2018 at Politico.com. It's called Trump Papers Filing System. There's another one that, an article about how he had asked the interpreter not to discuss what happened in the Hamburg meeting, private meeting with Putin, and we know Dan Coates told Andrea Mitchell he has no earthly idea, none whatsoever, what President Trump talked to Vladimir Putin with in Helsinki, and that we have a right to know.
In Helsinki, the president was alone with Vladimir Putin for 2 hours, more than 2 hours, with only translators. Mm-hmm. Basically, how do you know what happened? You were on the dark side of the moon. How do you have any idea what happened in that meeting?
Well, you're right. I don't know what happened in that meeting. I think as time goes by, and the president has already mentioned some things that happened in that meeting, I think we will learn more. But that is the president's prerogative.
No, it isn't.
If you had asked me how that ought to be conducted, I would have suggested a different way. But that's not my role. That's not my job. So
it is too.
It is what it is.
No, it isn't what it is. And this is the problem with Dan Coates. Okay, this is the Republican streak in Dan Coates. Dan Coates knows, because we know, because the Washington Post reported that Donald Trump, the president of the United States, confiscated the notes of his interpreter, took those notes from the meeting in Hamburg and also in Helsinki, and that the interpreter was seen leaving the Helsinki meeting with Putin with pages of notes. That, my friends, are presidential records. And the president has a sworn duty to keep those records, to not dispose of those records. Records means log files, metadata, conversations.
Problem comes from people who are different in race, language, religion, ethnicity, trying to share the same territory.
Look at Great Britain, look at France, look at Sweden. They have massive terror, crime, and disorder problems and cultural assimilation problems for one reason. They imported a bunch of people from a part of the world that doesn't share their values.
Look at the history of multiracial nations. It's a history of conflict, it's a history of distrust, and it's ultimately a history of blood and tears.
Latin American countries are changing election outcomes here by forcing demographic change on this country at a rate that American voters consistently say they don't want.
It sounds to me like we got a problem with people who got here legally altering the landscape politically. I don't like it. Fuck you. Stop it.
And notice where this change is not happening. Any place our leaders live. They caused all of this with their reckless immigration policies, and yet their own neighborhoods are basically unchanged. They look like it's 1960. No demographic change at all in their zip codes. Our leaders are for diversity, just not where they live.
I find, frankly, the kind of hypocrisy expressed by these alleged champions of diversity to be quite contemptible. They themselves can live in a way to insulate themselves from the brute strangeness of people that don't speak English or whose religion and culture are drastically different from theirs.
Hazleton's population was 2% Hispanic. Just 16 years later, Hazleton is majority Hispanic. That's a lot of change. People who grew up in Hazleton return to find out they can't communicate with the people who now live there. And that's bewildering for people. That's happening all over the country.
There is a campaign to make European Americans a minority in this country.
Their goal is to change your country forever, and they're succeeding, by the way.
We are being systematically and deliberately replaced.
You're a beneficiary of white privilege. Would that be hate speech? I'm attacking you because of your membership in a group. It could incite violence.
White privilege being taught at universities, which is meant to build up a stigma, build up hatred, and potentially pave the way for violence against white people.
As Vice.com succinctly put it a couple of years ago, quote, "It is literally impossible to be racist to a white person." Pretty much the entire left now takes that as a matter of faith. They deeply believe that. But what does that mean exactly?
But the real racism today is not by white people. It's against white people.
Wow, he sounds exactly like the white supremacist. Now, I appreciate that Media Matters has gone deep, deep, deep into the vault of Tucker Carlson's racist, misogynist, pro-rape of children rants. You know, I get that that's a good thing to do in a weird way, but why not just pull off of what he does today? Why not just put out the clips of him saying these white supremacist things on the faux news, on the FUX news, every day? I mean, I don't understand. You got all these people. You got Jeanine Pirro saying if you wear a hijab, you are anti-American, right? Right? You have that. What just happened? Oh no. I got the dreaded black screen, everybody. All right, so you know that you had Jeanine Pirro saying if you wear a hijab, then you're anti-constitutional. You have, Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham screaming that the demographics in this country are changing and they're becoming more brown. They're becoming more, black. And we can't have this.
Because in some parts of the country, it does seem like the America that we know and love doesn't exist anymore. Massive demographic changes have been foisted upon the American people. And they're changes that none of us ever voted for, and most of us don't like.
Really?
From Virginia to California, we see stark examples of how radically, in some ways, the country has changed. Now, much of this is related to both illegal and, in some cases, legal immigration that, of course, progressives love. Remember the old Democrats, maybe some of them that Ocasio-Cortez is referring to, they used to think that borders mattered. But the new activists believe enforcing immigration laws is essentially an ongoing human rights violation. Of course, they want to abolish ICE and so forth.
Yeah.
Well, today we were reminded again of why our law has to be enforced, borders strengthened, and the wall built, loopholes closed, and sanctuary city policies ended once and for all.
All right, so let's have a look-see at how we enforce our laws, okay? Let's just look at one thing. In nearly 9 months after the Trump administration officially rescinded its policy of separating asylum-seeking legal families, 200 migrant children have been taken from their parents and placed in an institution. Some of them are in foster homes, some of them are in shelters. There is a story in the Boston Globe today about a newborn baby, a 1-week-old baby. A man who runs a network of shelters in El Paso named Ruben Garcia said that immigration authorities dropped off an 18-year-old woman who was seeking asylum from Guatemala. And she told him, I have just given birth. The baby is less than a week old. I've been separated from my baby. How did that happen? Child welfare authorities had come to the hospital and taken her child, who was born here, therefore a U.S. citizen. The immigration officials took this 18-year-old girl who had just given birth to a detention cell and put her in it and left her there. And so the baby's first 2 weeks of life, where, you know, typically a baby needs to be held and breastfed, the 2 weeks were spent away from the mother. And finally, this woman found her baby and regained custody because legal aid groups got involved. This is according to Ruben Garcia, who runs a network of migrant shelters. So, I mean, how do these people live with themselves? How do they say that they, you know, Sarah Sanders, in response yesterday to a question about whether or not Democrats hate Jews, Democrats don't hate anybody. Democrats simply believe corporations are not a somebody. We don't believe corporations are people. We believe people are people. And that our policies ought to not celebrate and reward and give welfare to corporations over people. People need to come first. This is a government of, for, and by the people, not of, for, and by the corporations, although by the looks of things today, it is, because the corporations have taken over our government. And they sit there and they say things on the television about ripping babies from wombs when they are the ones that are literally ripping babies, newborns, away from their mothers, and then declare that the reason we must do this, the reason we must separate babies and mothers, the reason we must be so brutal, the reason why we have to be so difficult and hard and cruel and unusual is because that baby, who is now an American citizen, will grow up and have an opinion. And we don't want to hear that opinion. We don't want to see that child go from being an American citizen of a brown person or a black person, actually grow up to be somebody who serves in Congress and has an opinion. That would be horrific. A la, the pressure of a name, I don't know, Ilhan Omar, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib. This cannot happen. Brown people and people of weird dress and different style and different clothing. They should not be allowed to have an opinion, let alone a vote in the House of Representatives. That is what all this is about.
Think about it.
Think about it.
Omar wears a hijab, which according to the Quran 33:59 tells women to cover so they won't get molested. Is her adherence to this Islamic doctrine indicative of her adherence to Sharia law?
No. This is a sick channel. This is a sick propaganda machine. This is a twisted version of an opinion channel of white supremacists, okay? And the idea that they can brand themselves news, I'm telling you, there's some basic things that have to be legislated and they have to be done. They have to. If you're going to brand yourself news and you're going to use the news handle as a way to legitimize racism, as a way to legitimize hatred, as a way to legitimize fake information. Even on climate change, I mean, these people are just, they are vile. This morning, they had this guy on Fox and Friends calling, and they're attacking AOC. I mean, she's the new Maxine Waters, you understand. She's the new Nancy Pelosi. She's the new foil for the Republican Party. And they just lie. They just lie.
Sounds like you don't think her plan is a good one. What's your major problem with it?
Well, it's a silly plan. That's why I suggested she was a pompous little twit. Twit meaning silly in the British lexicon, and pompous meaning arrogant. And she really rubbed me the wrong way when she said she's the boss, because she can make up a proposal that's completely ridiculous and no one else did. And that is what's wrong about this. In fact, the whole climate crisis, as they call it, is not only fake news, it's fake science. There is no climate crisis. There is weather and climate all around the world. And in fact, carbon dioxide is the main building block of all life.
Okay, you get it? They find one guy to go against NASA and 97% of all scientists, atmospheric scientists, and all atmospheric science. We have satellites, we have global imagery, we see the ice sheets melting, we see, the sea levels rising. We had a 1.62 degree increase in temperature around the world. The Earth is warming, and everybody understands, including insurance carriers, that if you live at zero sea level, if you live like in Florida, okay, your insurance is going up, because they understand better than anybody, because they bet on whether or not you're going to have a flood when they make their flood policies for you, and they charge you a price for that. And they are betting that you will have some sort of, erosion of your land. So, I mean, these people are just fake. They're phony, they're false, they're racist, they're ugly, they're hateful. And the reason they do it is to protect corporate interests. The reason they do it is to keep one group of Americans firmly against another group of Americans, firmly against another group of Americans, against another. Because God help us if we all got together and realized that the corporations have taken over our government, which is just as heinous as if we said the government should take over our corporations. Now, that's what Fox News is accusing the left of wanting to do. Having the government take over corporations. Why? Because they're projecting. What has happened is corporations have taken over our government. That's just a cold stone fact.
All things Randi at RandiRhodes.com.
Go for launch.
Speaking truth to power, the Randi Rhodes Show.
I think that the effort to divide race and class has always been the tool of the powerful to prevent everyday working people from taking control of the government that is supposed to work for them. And so you see this. And so I think you actually see the beginnings of this. 2016, I think, was a really stark example of this. But you actually see some of the roots of this, and you see a lot of the roots of the issues that we have right now. Take really start to take hold in the late 70s and during the 80s. And one perfect example, I think a perfect example of how special interests and the powerful have pitted white working class Americans against brown and black working class Americans in order to just screw over all working class Americans. Is Reaganism in the 80s when he started talking about welfare queens. So you think about this image, welfare queens, and what he was really trying to talk about was this, he was painting this photo, he was painting this like really resentful vision of essentially black women who were doing nothing, that were sucks on our country, right? And it's this whole tragedy of the commons type of thinking where it's like, because this one specific group of people that you are already kind of subconsciously primed to resent, you give them a different reason that's not explicit racism, but still rooted in a racist caricature. It gives people a logical reason to say, oh yeah, no, toss out the whole social safety net.
Yeah. That's exactly right. It's exactly right. And everybody has to wake up, and everybody has to realize that pitting one group against another group, like white working class Americans against other working class Americans, screws all working class Americans. And it's by design so that white working class Americans can tell themselves, well, at least I'm not black. At least I'm not brown. At least I speak English. Now, I've heard a lot of people try to speak English who think they speak English, and trust me, you don't, because I don't understand a word you're saying. But this is a destructive way to message to people who work for a living. And yet it has resonance with people who are so frustrated and can't figure their way out of a paper bag, who I actually care about, because if we're not all doing well, and there are hungry children in this country, if there are, addicted parents trying to raise, I care about that, because my kids have to live in a world with your kids. And we are, at the very end, all inextricably linked to each other. And that's why if one person doesn't get justice, there is no justice. That's why you need equal justice under law. That's why you need a government that truly is for the people, by the people, and not for the corporations, by the corporations, which is where we are, which is why there's such a large interest in preserving the status quo. The corporate American culture is one that makes people literally shake in their shoes the second they walk into their job. They feel as if their civil liberties have gone out the window. Their ability to negotiate is vanished. People just struggle to figure out how they're going to get health insurance. They struggle to figure out how they're going to get time off to take care of a sick parent, or to take care of a sick child, or pay for childcare while they're at work. This is a ridiculous system. It doesn't work for working class Americans, period. And if you want to see what their priorities are, if you want to see what Fox News is advocating for with all this hatred and all this division and all this. Listen, Tucker Carlson is a specific example. This is a guy who hates women because his mother ran away from him when he was 6 years old. I don't know if you know that or not. But Tucker Carlson's mom, just ran away when he was 6 years old and decided to go live, a bohemian lifestyle in Europe, and she never heard, she never contacted the family again. So he hates women. I mean, that's just this very specific thing with him. And this misogyny comes from his childhood hurt. And then his dad remarried into the Swanson family fortune. Tucker Carlson is a very rich guy. And when they got married, they sent him away, just like they sent Trump away to military school. They sent Tucker away to boarding school. And Tucker is a very hateful person because he's had a hideous childhood. That said, he's part of this band that plays the same anti-black, anti-brown, anti-human, anti-personhood, pro-corporate, companies know better than people do. Companies need special protection under our law because you can't allow the unwashed masses to self-govern. It won't work out well. So when you look at this budget that the president just put forward, you can see that it's a killer for working class people. You can see that it's a cruel and unusual document. You can see the priorities of the Republican Party clearly in this budget. This is a pro-war budget. This gives an increase to the defense budget, another $750 billion for nothing but bombs, for nothing but war, for perpetual war. More tax cuts for corporations, more tax cuts for the very wealthy, more deregulation so that we now know that there's coal ash in almost all of our tributaries, almost all of our water. Now, if you're a libertarian, can I just ask you this simple question? You believe, I think, that the government's role should be doing only those things that people cannot do for themselves, correct? All right. If I accept that premise as being your governing principle, how in the hell do people keep their water clean without the government? How in the hell do I keep a coal power plant from dumping ash into the water and poisoning people without government? How in the hell do I keep the air clean without the government mandating cafe standards? How do I do that? Okay, I can't. And that's why this entire thing about libertarianism is bullcrap. It's bullcrap. We have already reached the debt ceiling. I want you to know that. The debt ceiling has been, it's been capped, and we reached it on March 1st. The debt ceiling is a legal cap about how much money the government can borrow, and it technically was breached on March 1st. But Mnuchin over at Treasury is implementing something called extraordinary measures to buy more time. Now, let's look at this killer budget. What does it do? Here are the numbers, just so you can see what their priorities are and why so much hatred is required in order to advance it. How white working class people in certain districts have to cut their noses off to spite their faces in order to support this party. $1.5 trillion in cuts to Medicaid over 10 years. Implementing work requirements for people who get Medicaid. Now, let me just tell you, Medicaid pays for nursing homes. I'm not really sure how those work requirements will play out for grandma. It also comes with drug treatment insurance. So I'm not really sure how the people who've gotten themselves in such a horrible position because of the biggest drug cartel ever known to man, Big Pharma, has gotten you addicted to synthetic heroin. I'm not sure how you work in order to get Medicaid for drug treatment. And I'm also not sure about how 90-year-olds, facing their end of their lives in nursing homes, which Medicaid pays for, how they meet the work requirement. But this is $1.5 trillion to Medicaid cuts, and it adds $1.2 trillion for a health care grant to your state. So instead of paying by need, instead of paying for people who qualify, the state is going to come up with some ideas about who gets it and who doesn't. But it has work requirements in it. Just know that. Then there's an $845 billion cut to Medicare. Oh, Medicare. Oh.
Save Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security without cuts. Have to do it.
Mm-hmm. Have to do it. His budget cuts $845 billion to Medicare, $1.5 trillion out of Medicaid, and $25 billion out of Social Security. And by the way, for those of you who are on disability insurance, it does cut your disability insurance. People who are disabled are going to face all kinds of obstacles like work requirements and time spent on disability and all that, because $25 billion is coming out of Social Security disability payments. $845 billion comes out of Medicare. It is a 10% cut for those of you who can't handle large numbers. And 1.5 trillion comes out of Medicaid, which pays for grandma's nursing home, poor people's health care, and drug treatment for people who, through the big drug cartel known as, Big Pharma has gotten, America into some opioid epidemic. Great. There is a $220 billion cut to food stamps, SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Programs. It includes mandatory work requirements for you as well. So, Mom, if you're out there and you can't afford child care so that you can take a job for $7.25 an hour, or even worse, a waitress job for $2.01 an hour, in a diner where the tips are probably going to average you somewhere between $10 and $20 a day, and childcare costs more than that, but you're making ends meet because you do get food stamps, just know this. If you don't take the job and pay for the child care, you're not going to get the food stamps. How that helps your family budget, I have no idea. But as somebody who, had a sister who was a single parent, who wrestled with how to pay for her child care as a hairdresser, just starting out and not having a client list, fresh out of school and working for like Supercuts, who needed her whole family to chip in for child care so she could actually go to work and get experience and build a client list, and then got cancer and died. I don't see how this helps. I don't know how this is going to work. There's a $207 billion cut to the student loan program. It eliminates the public service loan forgiveness option. So right now, if you have big student loan and you can find some public service that you can do that qualifies for student loan forgiveness, you can trade your time for student loan forgiveness. That it is eliminated. That program is cut. It also cuts student loans, subsidized student loans. So let's say Pell Grants. I got a Pell Grant to go to a community college. I got a Pell Grant. But it does increase defense spending by $34 billion next year to a $750 billion budget baseline, which is a 5% increase to defense and military spending. He also asks for $8.6 billion in funding for this stupid wall that has no prayer of doing anything that he thinks needs to be done. Whatever needs to be done under something called comprehensive immigration reform, which we had in 2006 and again in 2013 with the Gang of Eight, if you'll recall, which Paul Ryan wouldn't introduce in the House even for a vote, after the Senate crafted a bipartisan piece of legislation that would have helped us figure out how to accomplish comprehensive immigration reform. Why? Because they would rather have the issue. It plays really well for them when they're trying to divide white working class Americans from other shades of human working class Americans. They love this issue. It is a constantly brilliant performer for them with the white working class. Sick, sad, and true. There is a almost 10% cut in this budget of President Trump's to all non-defense items. Section 8 housing vouchers, which help people who work in big cities afford to live in big cities. You know that in certain restaurants in San Francisco that's been invaded by, Silicon Valley money, that the restaurants can't even afford to hire waiters or waitresses anymore. Why? Because those waiters and waitresses can't afford to live anywhere near these cities in order to do the work, like bus tables and serve. So there are restaurants now that are actually requiring their customers to bus their own tables. Go get your own napkins, go get your own water, go get your own silverware, go and bring your plates to the kid. In restaurants that are charging, full freight for a really, really great dinner. Because they can't keep waiters and waitresses coming to work because they can't live anywhere near those restaurants in those cities. It's sick. But this cuts Section 8 housing vouchers, which help people afford to live in cities, public housing, which help people afford to live in big cities, cuts Head Start because who wants a kid to get a Head Start in education? I mean, really. It cuts WIC, which is Women and Infants and Children's Nutrition Programs, which is the only thing that, that undocumented people in this country qualify for. They get WIC so their babies don't die. And it cuts, and listen to me in the North, it cuts LIHEAP, which is a program that helps you afford your energy during the freezing cold winters. This budget has more reductions in spending than any budget you've ever seen.
Connect. To speak to Randi, call 561-270-3844.
561-270-3844. You're a very rich guy. You've been open about that.
Yes, exactly.
You say there's something wrong with what Howard Schultz is doing. What is it?
Absolutely. I love the conversation you've been having, but I just want to make one point, is that, it's easy to call what AOC is doing as far lefty, but nothing could be further from the truth. When you advocate for economic policies that benefit the broad majority of citizens, that's true centrism. What Howard Schultz represents, the centrism he represents, is really just trickle-down economics, tax cuts for rich people, deregulation for powerful people, and wage suppression and benefit cuts for everyone else without the overt racism.
Right. So here's where we are. I mean, we have corporations that have taken over our government. I mean, the idea that Fox, pits one class of working people against one color of working people against another color of working people, and yet we're all in the same class. We're all in the same boat. We're all, economically challenged because the rich do not pay taxes. And that's because corporate interests are lobbying the government every minute of every day to do even more tax cuts, to do even more deregulation, to do even more for them, to highlight money, making money as the way this country, values things. Not work making money, not labor or the sweat of your brow making money. I mean, corporate hedge funds and money making money is taxed at a lesser rate than working class people who use labor to support themselves, who use their brains or who use their bodies or who use their time and energy to make money. And we're so productive, and yet you don't see an increase in our wages commensurate with the increase in our productivity, and that's because corporations have taken over all the legislation, have taken over the tax code, have taken over the priorities in Congress. That's how you get a budget that's as ugly as this one. And of course, Trump's going to sit there and he's going to tell you, well, growth is going to pay for all this. Growth is, if you let the corporations off the hook and if you let money be the priority and you let the people who make money make more money, it'll trickle down to you because growth. But you know what? Growth is going to be between 1.6 and 1.8% over the next 10 years. And Trump is basing everything on 5% growth, which he has not accomplished and will never accomplish. Right now, the fourth quarter last year, 2.5% growth, and the predictions are all 1.6 to 1.8. Revenue is drastically down because we stopped taxing the wealthy, because we stopped taxing corporations. I mean, you got trillion-dollar companies. I had a caller the other day who was seriously, he was a young kid, and he was seriously, wondering, what company doesn't pay taxes? And I told him, GE doesn't pay taxes. Amazon, a trillion-dollar company, they don't pay tax. Oh, really? I didn't know that. Yes, know that. And the reason is because they have taken over ownership of these Congress members. They own them, and they own the president of the United States. Big banks own, I mean, obviously, this president is indebted to somebody. That said, revenue is it's one of the lowest, growth rates in half a century. Revenue is down between 4 and 9% this year because of tax cuts. So the amount of money in the Treasury is going down, and yet the debt is going up, and the interest on that debt, meaning the subsidy that we created to give them this money that we have to pay, is going to surpass the entire defense budget. Nita Lowey, who heads the Appropriations Committee in the House, she said President Trump has somehow managed to produce a budget request even more untethered from reality than the past two. With such misguided priorities, the Trump budget has no chance of garnering the necessary bipartisan support to become law. I am committed to working with my colleagues, both Democrats and Republicans, to write appropriations bills that responsibly fund the government. Bernie actually said what I said. Bernie said the Trump budget is breathtaking in its degree of cruelty. This would hurt our seniors and is yet another piece of evidence for why we need a new president, said Kamala Harris. That's putting it mildly. Okay? That is putting everything mildly.
I don't think we should belittle our beliefs anymore. Like, we are capable of so much as a country. And we are capable of so much than what we're doing right now. Like, we are capable of everything in the world. We are capable of saving the planet, of guaranteeing healthcare as a right, of educating our children through college. We are capable of establishing all work as dignified, of respecting people's cultures, of having an economy that not only welcomes immigrants, but needs immigrants because we are being so productive. We are capable of all of these things.
We are. And instead of subsidizing, corporations, and instead of subsidizing the wealthy, and instead of our priorities being those, they need to be a centrist priority. And the centrist priority, and I know everybody thinks that means, corporate Democrats. No, the new center is working class people. The new center ought to be everyone who works for a living, everyone who needs, some sort of medical care and doesn't know where to get it, everyone that has a sick child, everyone that needs child care so that they can work, everyone who needs, some sort of education. If we would prioritize ourselves over corporations, if we would prioritize ourselves over this sliver of wealthy people, if we wouldn't cut Medicare in this budget, if we wouldn't cut Medicaid in this budget, if we would do something to negotiate down the price of prescription drugs like all other countries do on behalf of Medicare, if we would actually invest in Head Start, if we would invest in college education for those who qualify, if we would stop focusing on what do corporations need and what do the wealthy need and how could I give them more, if we would prioritize ourselves, that's centrist, because there are more of us that need a government that prioritizes people than there are people who want to prioritize corporate taxes and want to destroy health care and want to destroy Pell Grants. I mean, what a low that is. This budget is the lowest, and it doesn't balance the budget either. It doesn't do any of that. It doesn't balance the federal budget until 2034. And that's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous thing. And we are capable of doing things for ourselves if we would just realize that the priorities of the Republican Party, which is now the party of Trump, are cruel and unusual, even by Republican standards. Because back then he said,
save Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security without cuts. Have to do it.
Okay, and he said it over and over again. And Rick Scott, when he was running for the Senate, he accused Democrats of wanting to cut Medicare. I mean, they literally turn reality on its head over and over again. And they have this giant propaganda machine over there that pits, one color of American against another color of American, one religious group against another religious group, a non-religious group against the religious. It's ridiculous because all people need to eat. All people need to support their babies. All people need milk. All people need clean water. All people need clean air. It's just a fact. And this idea that we shouldn't get along is an idea that's been dreamt up by the powerful elite in order to keep them powerful and elite and separated from the unwashed masses, the proles. The proletariats. And that is why Fox News exists. It exists to make this hate, to make this fear of the other a real emotional tug of war for working class white people who can't afford to read a newspaper. Tucker Carlson is never going to apologize. And he's never going to have this emotional, epiphany that the reason why he says rape of children or the reason why he says women suck and we're primitive and, we should just shut up and do what he says or whatever he will never have this epiphany that where he sits on his television show and says, I've been promoting hatred and I've been promoting, misogyny and I've been promoting, that Iraqis are illiterate monkeys, which is, exactly what he said.
Iraq is a crappy place filled with a bunch of, semi-literate primitive monkeys. But I just have zero sympathy for them or their culture, a culture where people just don't use toilet paper or forks.
Okay, and this goes on and on and on. The reason why Tucker feels so bold in calling people illiterate monkeys or women, who are feminists, that, all we need is, for him to tell us to shut up and all of a sudden, whatever. I mean, it's because he was abandoned as a child. His father remarried an heiress and sent him away to boarding school. This is a wounded individual. This is a broken man. He will never apologize. His comfort zone is hate. Jeanine Pirro, she was married to the mob, for God's sake. You think she's not going to advocate for, doing the little things to get the little extras? This is her life experience. The scary thing about her is she was a judge and could literally put people away. She could literally take away your freedom. And she's a damaged human being, too. Laura Ingraham is a drunk. She's damaged too. And you have and Sean Hannity's dumb as a rock. That's just and he's a slumlord. Michael Cohen got him into the slumlord business. These are people that really believe that cheating is advantageous, that's how they got where they are. And they sit there every day, and I really believe this with my whole heart, knowing some of them, that they pray every single day that you never figure out that they are wounded, that they are hurt children, that they are, individuals who can't feel anything, and that you will figure out one day, that if you turned away from them, if you shunned them, if you turned your back on them, if you finally stood up to them and you said to them, your ideas make no sense for me. Your ideas aren't going to put food on my family's table. This hatred that I feel in the pit of my stomach whenever I listen to you because I want to believe you're right because I want to hate. I need to explain to myself how I got into this rut. And the only thing I could come up with is, you're telling me I should hate the person below me. But if you ever looked up and you said, you know what, the real problem is coming from up above. The people that are urinating on me are President Trump. It is the corporate elite. It is you. It is this channel. It is this hatred. That's what's destroying me as a person. That's what's destroying my ability to figure things out and demand that this government of mine do right by me finally and stop sending my jobs overseas and stop spending all the money on tax cuts for the wealthy and stop transferring the little bit of wealth that I have to other people who are better situated to write legislation than I ever will be. If that happened, these people would crawl into a hole and die. They're terrified of you. There is no question they are terrified of you. And they sit there and they say that they're under attack by a liberal mob. They need to be under attack by everyone who works for a living. They need to be shunned by each and every person who knows this country is capable of so much more. If only the corruption of the corporate money, if only the corruption of the rich, if only the dark money, the donor class would be prohibited from purchasing our Congress. If only we, and that's what H.R. 1 is. And that's what Democrats are working on. And that's why Nancy Pelosi doesn't want it disturbed. That's why Nancy Pelosi isn't really willing to risk impeachment right this second. I promise you, we're going to talk about Nancy Pelosi's interview with the Washington Post yesterday. Okay, we'll do it on the other side. I just want you to know what she's protecting. I just want you to know that we're on a winning streak. I just want you to know why it's so important for her to do something about this corruption. It's sort of like Howard Schultz wants to be president, and I get that. And Howard's from Canarsie, and I'm from Canarsie, and I get where he comes from, and that he's a self-made guy, and that, whatever, his start in life was no better or worse than mine, and he's gone all the way, okay? I get that. But the problem with a Howard Schultz candidacy or any third-party candidacy, even if the person is a good person, even if the person has wonderful ideas, even if it's Ralph Nader, who had a total understanding of consumer protection, who understood that corporations were literally deaf, dumb, and blind to consumers, that you would drive whatever, you'd fly in whatever, and we're having this right now with the airplane debacle, okay? That, your safety can be purchased, and you just take whatever it is that they send to, take you into the sky. And if it's a bad system and if it crashes, too bad, Boeing owns the government, right? So even if you're a good person, the problem that needs to be solved first, if we're going to have more than two choices come presidential election time, is the system, the electoral college, the corporate money, the donor class. All of that has to be fixed if we're ever going to get more than two choices for president of the United States. That's just a fact. And so you can't start at the top. And I would think somebody from Canarsie, somebody from the projects, somebody who grew up and went to the same, I think he went to the same public school I did. PS 272, I don't know. That's where I went. Curtis Esterbrook, okay? You would think somebody who came from there would understand that the systemic problems have to be solved first, that you cannot start at the top. Now, I will tell you this, Howard Schultz's people reached out to me and asked if they could be on the show on Thursday, but I have a funny feeling they don't know very much about me. So we'll see if that ever happens. Go to RandiRhodes.com for the whole thing and a podcast. Buy a stinking podcast.